President.
The senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, this is my first speech to the Senate. And it's interesting because as a child, I would read about how the Senate was a great deliberative body. I would read of the debates in which issues were discussed that changed the course of our country's history. And the key thing here is it is a deliberative body. I was in the Senate Energy Committee the other day, and one of the opponents of this Keystone bill said, we need to be guided by science. I like that thought. We're not to be guided by our prejudice. We're not to be guided by what we want to be the case. We are to be guided by the facts. Because just as when I was a kid and I would read about how this great deliberative body would decide things that would then decide our country's future, this Keystone bill decides the future for many issues. So with that said, let me also add, I just came over from the House of Representatives, and one of the nice things I had the privilege to do was to enter a Keystone bill quite similar to this one, which passed. And in the course of that bill being introduced, passed, debated, et cetera, I heard the arguments of those who are opposed to the Keystone bill and have been able to think about them. I'm pleased to say I think there's actually common ground. If the American people want the Senate to work together, Mr. President, to come up with solutions on a bipartisan basis, and if we are to be guided by science and the facts and not by our prejudice, and if what we deliberate will help determine the future of our country and of many families in our country, I am pleased to say that we have common ground. The opposition is concerned about climate change, increased carbon emissions, the amount of oil that might be spilled, whether or not this encourages the use of fossil fuels, are the jobs being created worth to be created? We can address these factually, not by prejudice, but by using actually President Obama's own State Department information. And with that kind of source, it is President Obama's State Department providing the answers to these questions. Let's go through them. First, the President's own State Department says that building the pipeline will decrease carbon emissions. There will be less oil spilled. By the way, it will not only create jobs, it will also save workers' lives. We are deliberating a bill here which, according to President Obama's State Department, will save lives. That is truly changing the future of somebody. In detail, let's say, on page 34 of President Obama's State Department report, it says that the pipeline will have no significant environmental impact. It will actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 28 to 42% relative to not building the pipeline at all. President Obama's own State Department also acknowledges that these oil sands are going to be developed whether we build that pipeline or not. And if they are not piped to the Gulf Coast of Louisiana and Texas to be processed, sent to overseas markets like China, creating Chinese jobs instead of American jobs. I think it's also safe to say we read about how in China people can't see the blue sky. Their environmental standards far laxer than ours. If it goes to the Gulf Coast, I can tell you, I just came from Louisiana yesterday, I saw blue skies. With our environmental standards, this will be processed in a way which is most environmentally friendly. If it goes to China, there'll be pollutants put out in the air, which the jet stream will blow over the United States. If we're to be guided by science and not by prejudice, Mr. President, the science would say we should build that pipeline to allow those oil sands to be processed in the United States of America. And as regards, as I heard one person say that he would be for the pipeline if he was sure the oil would not be exported. And I don't quite know how to respond to that. Because if we don't build the pipeline, it is absolutely going to be exported. It is going to be exported to China, and then quite likely we will buy the refined products that the Chinese then produce. On the other hand, again, referencing President Obama's State Department, they have said that if we pipe that oil to the Gulf Coast, our Gulf Coast refineries are uniquely equipped to process that oil in an environmentally safe way, and so it is unlikely that it will be exported. I will add to that, according to World Trade Organization guidelines, if we accept an import from another country, we cannot not export it should there be higher value. But I return to what President Obama's State Department said, Mr. President, that the Gulf Coast refinery's unique ability to refine this in an environmentally sensitive way means that despite World Trade Organization restrictions, it is unlikely that it will be exported. Now, there's some other benefits as well. It is clear it will diversify our energy security. Instead of buying our oil from the Middle East or from countries like Venezuela who don't care for us, in fact, use the money we pay them in some cases to finance terrorism, it'll come from a trusted neighbor who will spend that money that we pay Canada for this commodity back into the North American economy, creating jobs indirectly in the United States that otherwise would not be. Which leads us to the question, are these jobs worth having? In a word, the answer is absolutely. Now, we all know that creating better jobs, Mr. President, for American families is what should be the Congress's priority. For 6 years, we've been talking about building the Keystone XL pipeline, and we've put, if you will, we've postponed the creation of these jobs. But let's just look at it. Refineries in my state of Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast would benefit because there'd be roughly 100,000 barrels a day of crude oil transported to us. In Louisiana, up to 12% of that oil would end up in our refineries. More than $1 billion in revenue to our economy. It would create over 40,000 construction jobs over a 1 to 2 year period. Now, some who oppose this say, well, these jobs only last for a week or two. I was outside the Energy Committee hearing room, and there's a couple fellow from trade unions who stopped me. They said, we need these jobs. I said, what about the argument of the other side that the jobs only last 2 weeks? Those are the nature of our jobs. If you bring a master welder in, he will do or she will do their job for 2 weeks and then move on to another. But for our union members to get their union benefits, they have to work a certain number of hours per quarter or per month. I forget the unit of time. But this will allow them to meet that minimum requirement in order to continue to receive union benefits. I can tell you, the crafts unions think that these jobs are worth having. And these are well-paying jobs with good benefits. They're not a service sector in which hours might have been reduced from 40 to 30 hours a week. These are great jobs, great benefits. Now, the American people want Washington to work together. I introduced, as I mentioned earlier, and passed Keystone legislation in the House of Representatives. Keystone has become a symbol for North American energy independence. Now, approving this pipeline is not the final step in this independence, but it is a next step. It's a good step. And the case for approving this pipeline and other energy infrastructure projects is clear. So I encourage my colleagues to join in approving the Keystone XL pipeline and putting this debate to rest, because I truly believe we have common ground. If we're to be guided by the science and the facts and not by prejudice. We know from President Obama's State Department, it reduces carbon emissions, it will decrease the amount of oil spilled, it has minimal effect upon the environment, it will save the lives of the workers while strengthening our national security, enhancing our energy independence, and creating 40,000 American jobs. That's why more than 60% of Americans support this bill. It is a jobs bill, a national security bill. It is a bill which should be passed. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President, the senator from Kansas.